The United States claims to have over 8,000 tons of gold, but what if I told you no one's actually seen that gold in decades? Now supposedly these bars are stored in heavily guarded vaults, the most famous of which is the Fort Knox Bullion Depository in Kentucky, which alone holds about 4,580 tons, almost half of the country's gold. The rest is split between the U.S. Mint and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's vault. In total though, the U.S. reserves have stayed at about 8,100 tons for decades, with only small changes. And the value of all this gold, or something called the book value, is set at a very specific price, $42.22 per ounce, totaling about 11 billion. But there's a problem. That price is way below today's market value. At recent market prices, this gold would be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The U.S. gold reserve is a hugely valuable asset, even if its official accounting value hasn't been updated since the 1970s. But why? Surely the gold reserves are reviewed every year. Right? Supposedly it should be, it isn't. And just recently, U.S. banks have been flying in thousands and thousands of gold bars from London to New York, sparking a lot of theories as to what is actually happening. So the question is, if we looked in there today, what would we find? Why doesn't the government just do an audit and tell us? And if it's missing, how would that affect ordinary people? It's one of the most interesting stories you're going to hear about, and that's what I want to share with you. So with that said, let's get into it. Hi, my name is Michael Knight. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for the gold. Now gold is part of America's mythical lore, and throughout history, there have been rumors that the United States doesn't actually have the gold. It says it does. But first, I got to ask, how did the US even end up with over 8,000 tons of gold? In 1933, during the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt ended the gold standard for US citizens and ordered the confiscation of most privately held gold through Executive Order 6102. Americans were required to turn in all their gold coins and all their bullion to the government in exchange for paper dollars. This was super controversial at the time, and it resulted in a huge inflow of gold to the US Treasury. Now, to story. Fort Knox Depository was built in 1936, and by 1937, there were trainloads of seized and stolen gold that were moved into these new vaults. Now, its global tensions rose before World War II. The US got even more gold from other countries to help them protect it. And by 1941, US gold reserves peaked. By the end of 1941, Fort Knox alone held over 20,000 metric tons. Now, at that time, the US controlled about 2/3 of the world's official gold, a concentration of wealth, unlike any time in human history. And all of this happened because decades of trade surpluses, and the influx of gold from Europe, which had gained to the US for safekeeping during World War II. And gold was seen as this huge part of the monetary system. And under the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement, the US dollar was directly attached to gold at $35 per ounce, and other countries linked their money to the dollar. America's huge pile of gold gave other countries confidence in the dollar's value. Then in the 1950s to the 1960s, in the post-war decades, everything started to reverse. The US gold reserves started to go down, and America started to run what are called trade deficits. And it spent a lot of money on overseas commitments. The US was sending money to countries left and right, and before long, countries started asking for their gold back in exchange for the dollars they had held, which was allowed at the time under the Bretton Woods Agreement. And systematically, gold flowed out of US vaults to pay other countries, and US holdings fell from the World War II peak. And by 1971, US gold reserves were down to about the same level they are today. So what did the US do? It was kind of a rug pull. President Richard Nixon closed the gold window on August 15, 1971, ending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. This action broke the Bretton Woods Agreement, and it put the world on a pure fiat or paper currency standard. At that point, the United States decided to keep what was left of the gold, rather than continue allowing people to redeem it. So the next question is, if the US dollar is not backed by gold anymore, why does the Federal Reserve supposedly have so much gold still? And the truth is, it doesn't. In reality, the Federal Reserve does not directly own any of the country's gold since 1934. Because all the federal gold was turned over to the Treasury. But the Fed does have a claim on it in the form of a gold certificate issued by the Treasury. This gold certificate is recorded on the Fed's balance sheet, which is sort of like its portfolio of assets, which totals gold at about 11 billion. That represents the nation's entire official gold stock. So the Federal Reserve holds the certificate, and the physical gold stays in the Treasury's vaults. Now, even though the US dollar is no longer backed by gold reserves, there's still an important part of what gives the dollar its perceived value. Because ever since 1973, the gold has been fixed at this $42 per ounce rate, which totals $11 billion. On paper, but in reality, the market's value is way higher. However, the Treasury does not do what's called mark-to-market the asset. And that's why any increase in gold's market price today is not reflected in their official accounts. So the question is, why hold all of that gold? And why the US has so much gold is because it's seen as a hedge against currency risk. Senator Rand Paul once said gold still gives value to the dollar, and that's why we don't get rid of it. Also, it brings attention to the fact that gold still has value, and implicitly, not explicitly, but implicitly, gold still gives value to the dollar. That's why we don't get rid of it. So it's a symbol of stability carried over from the old era of monetary history. But here's what's interesting. If gold was marked to market, and the price was raised from the $42 an ounce to the current market value, in theory, the Treasury could issue more gold certificates to the Fed in exchange for more dollars. And that's why people have pointed out that we should look at revaluing the US gold reserves to market prices, so we could add hundreds of billions of dollars to the Treasury's assets. Because if the Treasury has more assets, it can use them to reduce the national debt and stabilize the economy. So then the question is, why don't we do that? And here's where we get into some really interesting theories. Even though the US government tells us that the gold is still there, and it's still very safe, a lot of people don't believe the government. First of all, there's a lot of secrecy around all of this. You can't just visit Fort Knox and the other vaults to look at the gold. And that has fueled a lot of speculation that not everything is what it seems. Now in the 1960s and 1970s, for example, several people claimed that most of Fort Knox's gold was secretly removed, with rumors even suggesting that President Lyndon B. Johnson shipped tons of US gold to London during the late 1960s. Now according to this theory, the US gold stash might have been used or lent out without the public's knowledge, and Fort Knox became a giant empty shell guarded for show. Now these claims actually captured the public's imagination, especially as the US gold supply was really shrinking in the 1960s. Now other people say that, now actually the US has all the gold. Please, help us out by subscribing. Our goal is to hit 50,000 subscribers by December of 2025. Regardless of YouTube's censorship and attack to free speech and conservatives. This is Michael Knight wishing you the very best, and thanks for tuning in, Patriots, and we will see you again. God bless you and good luck. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share this video with all your friends. Where we go one, we go all.